The guiding principles of art, known as the fundamentals, are the most important thing that you can learn if you want to be a successful artist. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of content out there about art fundamentals specifically designed for 3D artists, so I thought I would take a crack at it. In this YouTube course, I'm going to be going through almost all of the major art fundamentals, breaking them down one by one. Now, we can skip one or two of those. Specifically, we don't need to do perspective because luckily in 3D we get perspective for free, and I'm not going to teach anatomy because I'm not the best guy to be teaching that, frankly. So I thought we'd start with lighting. Now, lighting is to me the most important thing to get right when you're trying to make anything look good in 3D, especially if you're going for realism. Half the time, the only difference between a shot or an animation that looks very fake and one that looks great is the way that it's lit. So let's jump into Blender and start talking about lighting. So one of the most important things to understand is light fall off. This doesn't matter so much for traditional artists, but it's very key in 3D art. Light fall off is basically the way that intensity of light changes over distance. Now, light follows something called the inverse square law, which basically just means every time you double the distance from a light source, the amount of perceived light hitting the surface will be 1/4. So I have two planes here, but one of them's twice the distance from the light as the other one, and you can see that's exactly the case. This is about 1/4 the brightness of this one. We can test this for ourselves. This is 10 watts. If we make it 4 times brighter, they look to be about the same brightness, and in fact they are exactly the same brightness now. So why does this happen? Well, if you've ever used a projector and you've moved the projector twice the distance away from the wall, you might know that it gets 4 times larger. We can see this if we go into front view as well. This circle that's been projected is 4 times larger than this one. So obviously, if you're projecting the same amount of light, but it's covering 4 times the amount of surface area, it's going to be 1/4 the brightness, right? They're both getting hit by the same amount of photons, but this one's been spread over a larger area. So who the hell cares, right? What difference does it make how fall-off works? Well, it makes a big difference if you're trying to do an exterior scene versus an interior. If we add the sunlight to this scene, you'll notice that everything is lit with the exact same intensity of light. And it doesn't matter where I move this in the scene, it makes no difference to the light. The only thing that makes a difference is the angle of the light, the rotation. And the reason for that is because the sun is so far away from the earth that on our scale, the effective fall off is just tiny. You would have to move like 1,000,000 miles away from Earth before you would see the light from the sun starting to get much dimmer. So most of the time, if you're doing an outdoor scene, you want to use the sunlight because Blender's just going to act like this is infinitely far away, essentially. The same thing happens if we use a HDRI for lighting. The color and the intensity comes from the image, but everything gets the same sort of treatment as if it was just infinite distance. Now, what a lot of people do, they make the mistake of using something like an area light, and I'll move that above the scene and put this on, say, 1000. But you notice now that we have a bright spot over here and it's dark over there. So what they try to do is they duplicate the light. Now we have this really artificial looking lighting situation. We still have these hot spots of light, and now we have this sort of weird double shadow thing where the shadow's lighter over here than it is here, which is not something that would happen outdoors. There are some times occasionally where you do want to play with the fall off of a light. If you want to do that, just go to the shading tab, make sure that use nodes is enabled, and look for the light fall off. I'm going to turn the strength on that to something like 1. Quadratic isn't going to have any effect on an area light because it's already quadratic. Linear means that whenever you double the distance from the light, it will be half as bright, not quarter of as bright. And constant, it doesn't matter how far away the light is. You can also use the smooth function, which is pretty good, which is basically going to do exactly what it sounds like. It just smooths the light as you get further away from the light source. One big mistake that I regularly see amateur artists making is being too afraid of shadows. Everything's very evenly lit and you hardly ever see any harsh shadows anywhere. But if you look at the work of actual professionals, you'll notice that we love to use harsh shadows all the time. We use them to carve out compositions, we use them to add extra story elements to a scene, to put emphasis on certain things, or just to add a little bit of visual interest. Now, one of the best ways to do this was with something called a gobo. Gobo is a term that comes from cinema. It's basically an insert that goes in front of a stage light to add something else to the light. Now, it might be a stencil of some branches to make it look like the light is coming through trees via the shadows. It might be a gel insert like this, just to change the color of the light. Or it might be a more complex insert that actually projects an entire image onto the stage. In this example, for instance, I've used a gobo to make it appear as if some sunlight is streaming through a stained glass window or a door. Now, in reality, this is just a sun lamp which is projecting that light with a gobo on it straight into the scene. But I think it looks very good, the final effect, and you don't have to worry about calculating caustics or something. To add a gobo in Blender is very simple. All you need to do is add a spotlight, go to the shader editor and use nodes, and then you can just plug your image texture straight in. Now, if you do that, what you will notice is that things aren't aligned properly. So what you want to do is add a texture coordinate and use the normal into vector, and then change all of these numbers to 0.5 and plug that in, and that will fix any issues that you'll have with this. And we'll plug that into the color, or if you want to use this to project shadows, you want to plug it into the strength instead. I've recently been working on a big pack of animated gobos to include in the next update to my new course, the Interior Masterclass. The Interior Masterclass is a 7.5-hour Blender training course where I take you through my entire process for making a beautiful Victorian-style living room in Blender. It's not a follow-along tutorial where you'd be expected to make the same thing I make. It's more of a workflow tutorial if you want to find all the tips and tricks that I use to actually make these sorts of scenes. It also comes with a really useful pack of everyday assets for interior scenes that you can use in your own work. That's things like doorknobs and light switches. These gobos that I'm working on will be included in the updated version in the future, as I am continually updating this course. If you like the sound of that, please check out the link in the description where you can see a link on Gumroad and on Blender Market where you can pick up a copy for yourself today. So let's talk about different lighting setups, which ones you should use, which ones you should avoid, and at least the implications of different lighting scenes if you are going to use them. Now, I have a character here. He's from the Human Generator add-on. It's a really great add-on for making characters. I'll link it in the description. And the first thing I'm going to always try and avoid if I'm lighting a character like this is to put the light right next to the camera's direction. The reason for that is because as nice as this model is, if we take a look at it, it looks terrible. The reason it looks terrible is because we're only getting the color information from this character. We have basically no information about the shape of this guy's face because we have no shadow. Because obviously the light is coming straight from our viewpoint. This is all we're going to get. There's one or two times where you might want a light from the camera's point of view, like I did this zombie short animation a few years ago and I used like a flashlight in the character's hand, but it was a very narrow beam flashlight and that makes things just kind of creepy because you can only see what's in the beam of the light. That was the idea there. Speaking of making things creepy, you almost always want to avoid lighting people from underneath. Something like this. There's a reason why when kids are telling ghost stories they put a light underneath their chin. This is a very creepy lighting setup. I'm not saying don't ever use it, but you don't want a nice character to ever be lit like this, put that way. And the reason for that, if we look at the areas of the face that are being like lit up here, basically, right? We have the cheekbones, we have the chin, bottom of the nose, the mouth. We hide this guy. That's a skeleton, okay? We're looking at a skull. That lighting setup is highlighting this guy's skull, and skulls are creepy. So it's not something you always want to avoid, but just be careful when you use it. I grab this light again and I come straight down from the top. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. You see, in this case, top-down lighting can have a few different implications, but it often looks very artificial and kind of oppressive. This is used often by directors if they want to show like a character's uncomfortable or if there's like a higher authority above them. This is used quite often in interrogation scenes, for instance, when you want the character to look like they're in a tricky situation. If you think of the first Matrix movie where Agent Smith is interrogating Neo, they have quite a strong light directly above them for that exact reason. Okay, so how should you light people and light scenes? Well, a really common lighting setup that people use is a 3-point light. What that basically entails is you have one light which comes usually from either the left or the right, so it's not coming straight on from the camera. This is your main light, right? Sometimes called your key light or various other things. And the point of this is to give you the main lighting. And you can already say that this character looks better just with that light on. The second light that we'd usually use is a fill light. Obviously, we can only see half of this guy's face. So what we do is we put another light, maybe a different color. In this case, it's slightly orange and quite weak. And we're just using that to pick up the other side of the face so it's not completely in shadow. So if we turn those both on together, you can see that we have just a little bit of detail in the shadow side, but we still have the main effect of them being lit by the other side. Okay, the third one that you want to use, it has many names, but it's usually called a rim light or a hair light. And that's a bright light, quite often a different color, which comes from the background like this. And the point of this is to basically just kind of add a little bit of separation between the background and the character. Now, obviously in this case, he's just on a black background, but if it was a little bit busier back there and there was some stuff going on, a light like this could really help. And if we bring all these lights in together, that is your basic 3-point lighting setup. It works for people and it also works quite well for environments. All of those examples I just gave you are what are known as unmotivated light sources. An unmotivated light source is basically a light that doesn't appear on the screen. The audience doesn't know where this lighting is coming from. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's used all the time. If you watch an episode of Friends, all of those characters are getting pretty much evenly lit from all over the place. There's no explanation of where that light is coming from, nor does it really matter. But often it's a good idea to put some motivation into the light. Maybe you have a guy who's been interviewed and he's sitting on a chair opposite someone else and there's a strong light hitting his face. So you put a fireplace in between them to kind of explain where this light is coming from. Or maybe he has a blue LED strip going around his desk to explain where the fill light is coming from on the side of his face. But I'm lying to you because that is actually an LED panel that has nothing to do with the lights that are going around the desk at all. Then of course I have my key light, which is one of these big blinding lights. That is an unmotivated light, but it's not weird or anything because you guys know I make YouTube videos for a living and I probably have a light over there. I couldn't possibly make a video all about lighting without talking about the backlit shot. This is a technique that I use all the time in my own animations. It's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a strong bright light in the background of the shot which separates the background from the foreground and usually turns the foreground elements into a silhouette. It's a very powerful technique, especially if you combine it with some volumetric so you have all that light cutting through the fog. There's a website called Film Grab, which is basically just a collection of all of the nicest shots in cinema. And if you look at Film Grab and go to any page basically, you'll always find at least about half a dozen of these types of shots. Cinematographers absolutely love them. You can tell a lot about a character potentially just from using one of these shots. For instance, if you have a character who's standing kind of ominously in the backlit and you only see the silhouette, that can be a really great way to say that either a character's in danger or the character on the screen is a bit of a creep. Combining just a few of the techniques from this video can be extremely powerful. For instance, this might just look like a boring old bridge in London, but if we add some fill lights, some rim lights, and maybe some animated gobos, suddenly we have the makings of a famous music video. That brings us to the end of episode 1 of 3D Art Fundamentals. I'll be making more of these videos in the future, so make sure you're subscribed to DECODED if you're not already. Also check out the link in the description where you can pick up my course, the Interior Masterclass on Gumroad or Blender Market. I'll also leave a link to the trailer which contains a lot more information than what I've included in this video. Thanks for watching guys and take care.